largest companies that make up the S&P all reporting. And what I will share is that the general theme so far, anyways, is that a lot of these companies did actually beat the earnings. Thursday, we have a ton to cover this week with jobs, inflation, and consumer data all in just this last week or so. My name is Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group. And our goal every Thursday is to bring to you the market news, the data, the trends we're watching, hopefully weed out a bit of the noise along the way. And again, this week is absolutely full of data. So this is going to be a lot of numbers and a lot kind of packed into one quick update here this week. As a result of that, our question of the week will kind of skip, but we'll tie in kind of an earnings update from last week as well as part of that. So again, we have jobs, inflation, and consumer data all that have rolled out over the past 7 days. So I'll start by just kind of going in chronological order here. So going back to last Friday, we had consumer sentiment numbers come out, and the consumer sentiment numbers showed some positivity there to end the week there last week. Now, a bit of a tip of the cards with what we're seeing with the market today on Thursday, based on some of the bigger tech, not necessarily earnings, believe it or not, but some of the reporting of what's to come and some guidance moving forward. That consumer sentiment may have shifted a little bit over the last week or so, but nonetheless, last Friday's reading was positive. And then as we look into the job side of things, this Tuesday, we had job openings come out, and that was lower than prior at 7.44 million. So again, maybe starting to see that discrepancy, begin to shrink a little bit further. We also had ADP employment report numbers come out yesterday on Wednesday, and that shows that we had added 233,000 jobs for the month. And then last one that we have so far anyways is initial jobless claims, which fell as well to 216,000. So this was a good sign. You may remember a couple of weeks back, we talked about this trend in initial jobless claims, which typically can be kind of a leading indicator of what's to come on the other jobs data points. But 2 weeks ago, we started seeing a shift in that, where that number actually started to change a little bit and buck the trend. This is another data point to suggest that may be happening as well. So certainly good to see that. But the big number, of course, will be tomorrow. We get non-farm payrolls and unemployment report data. So we will keep you up to date next week as we get the Friday data on non-farm payrolls and unemployment as well. And then the last big thing to kind of highlight here this week on the data side of things is that we also had inflation data come out today. So we had, before I get into the inflation, excuse me, let me also wrap up the consumer side of it. We also had personal income and personal spending data come out. So personal income was up 0.3% and spending was up 0.5%. So a pretty big tick up there in spending for the month, which, again, just continues to show this sign that the consumer remains strong and remains spending. So certainly could be, what's kind of helping keep everything moving the direction it has been all of 2024 here, really tied to the consumer strength. And then lastly, again, we do have inflation. So today we had PCE data come out, and the headline number, so again, that includes food and energy, came out at 0.2%, up 0.2%, which was in line with expectations. And the core number came out up 0.3%, which is also in line with expectations. So I don't know that there's a whole lot to break apart here, but the thing that I do want to highlight, which many of you who tune in, on a consistent basis know this, we have been sharing that we do expect, and we expected inflation to come down as it has more recently here, but we expected that this last leg to 2% was going to be really difficult, and it certainly is seeming to be the case. Not to say we can't get there, it won't get there. We're watching money supply really closely to see how that shapes up over the coming months, but that drop from the 2.7, I believe we're at roughly year over year now, to 2%, that is where I think it's going to take a little bit longer. It might go a lot slower than it did the prior 6 months or so to get us to this point from where we were a ways back there. So just keep an eye on inflation. The Fed has mentioned a 2% target. However, they're clearly making changes without actually having seen that specific number. So maybe 2% isn't as relevant as it might seem on the surface, but technically that is what the Fed has said is their target. So it is an important number to kind of keep in mind anyway. Coming up next week, we have non-farm payrolls that we'll cover from tomorrow's data point. And then there's something next week. Oh, yes. We have an election. And on top of that, we have a Fed decision and a press conference. So next week is full as well. And we will be sure to catch up on everything that we know by Thursday. Although, as you know, lately, the way elections go, we may not really have any clarity quite yet then either. But nonetheless, we will absolutely catch up on what we know at the moment on Thursday, as well as kind of debrief the Fed press conference. Before we break for this week, though, I did want to circle back just briefly on some of the earnings side of things. So the question last week was about earnings reports, and coming into this week, we had Meta, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, right? Some of the largest companies that make up the S&P all reporting. And what I will share is that the general theme so far, anyways, is that a lot of these companies did actually beat the earnings. So, over the last week or so, it's been relatively good. Google did great. Microsoft and Meta both reported yesterday, and Microsoft did great, but they did lower guidance. Meta did great on earnings, but they did start talking about capital expenditures. So although the earnings were great so far on the three that have reported of these big companies, there have been some challenges. And so today on Thursday, we're seeing markets pull back a little bit as a result of that, because again, how much those companies weigh on the S&P, believe it or not, that is making a big impact here today on Thursday for markets. So obviously that carries into how investors are viewing other companies in the markets in general, but it is important to take that into account. And then after the close today, we also get Apple and Amazon earnings. So we'll see what they share, not just on the earnings side of it, but also what they share as far as guidance and what they expect ahead. But certainly a big week. Again, so far, earnings have been good, actually, on these companies. It's actually more reading between the lines of what they're sharing in terms of guidance and some expenditures coming up. But we got two more of the big ones to come here after the close. And obviously a lot more companies on top of that. But we're just kind of highlighting some of the bigger ones, given the weighting on the S&P itself. All right. So hopefully that's helpful. We will see you next Thursday at 3, where we will have a lot more to break down yet again. In the meantime, have a great, Halloween too. Have a great Halloween and a great upcoming weekend.